Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening and shalom, Genant. People, welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Hey, wait, tada. Welcome to it. We're going to have a rather interesting 30-minute show. Remember, every Wednesday, 7:30 p.m., your favorite fat boy, Big Daddy Liberty, is on your screens. Whether you're watching this on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube, make sure, please, the only price of admission is that you hit that like button. Do it now. Smash that like button. Please make sure you also subscribe to the show on YouTube. And like us on the Facebook pages. That's all you need to do to help me get this show out to a bigger audience. And actually, there's a bigger imperative. There's a much bigger imperative. I've warned you guys before that my days on the Silicon Cartel sites, your Facebooks and your YouTubes, are likely, very, very likely limited and numbered, given the censorship of these particular platforms. I'm already seeing strikes against my channel on YouTube now related to the spicy cough. You know how it is. The censorship overlords are quite explicit in making sure only their narrative goes out. So I did mention this, that I will be exploring other avenues, other platforms which are much more pro-free speech, such as Rumble, Odyssey, and the like. So I'll be exploring those, and you might see me on those in future. But with that being said, welcome to it. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I have a special guest tonight as we unpack the issue. As we unpack the issue of a one Jacob Zuma, who has been ordered to go back to prison by the North Gauteng High Court. Now, obviously, this was a judgment that passed today, which obviously, for those of us who were attuned to the issue and had seen just how much of a injustice and a special privileging of this individual that this whole medical parole process had unfolded. For those of us who could see that Jacob Zuma was being given preferential and special treatment because he's a politician, we knew that once this had been taken to court, that any sane, sober judge would literally order this man back into prison, because once again, we have a situation where there are rules for them, the political elites, and a complete set of different rules for the rest of us. And that cannot carry, that cannot be right if we're to, if we really are, pardon me, a functional democracy. So today's ruling is actually a good one in that regard. Insofar as the judge reaffirming, the judge almost with a crystal clarity of thought, reaffirming that actually we're all equal before the law. And in this case, Jacob Zuma needs to take his ass back to prison and serve that 15-month prison sentence that he was handed down by the Constitutional Court for being in contempt of court. So this whole notion that he's been trying to push, this whole rhetoric that he's been trying to push at, oh, he was imprisoned without trial, his supporters, and he said, is absolute nonsense. But hey, don't take it from me. We're going to have two guests tonight who will help us unpack this issue, including, of course, the appeals that have now been lodged by the Correctional Services and, of course, the Jacob Zuma himself. But let me not waffle away. Let me actually bring on a legal mind who is literally my go-to for all things legal. Eagle, there he is, Martin van Staden. Homie, good evening. Welcome to the BDL show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome, brother. If you can just try and get your sound levels a little bit higher. I'll also, whilst you do that, pardon me, let me bring on my other guest, a chap who I go to rarely for all things self-defense, firearm rights. And no, I don't mean Gideon Newbear, although you will hear from him a little later tonight. But I'm talking, of course, about Ian Cameron. There he is. We actually were in conversation with Ian this past Sunday. Ian, good evening. Welcome to the BDL show.
How's it? Thanks, Eclair. Thanks, Martin. Looking forward to having a chat.
Awesome, fellas. Let's jump straight into it, because really, the BDL show is really not more than just 30 minutes. But I want us to have this conversation because obviously this ruling was this morning around sort of something to 11 this morning. The North Gauteng High Court, the judge, unequivocal, Martin, in his condemnation, firstly, of the process that was followed, or really the lack of due process that was followed by the Correctional Services boss, one Arthur Fraser, who, surprise, surprise, is actually a Zuma loyalist.
Yeah, I mean, so I hope I'm coming through clearly now.
Yeah, you're okay.
Cool. Yeah. So I mean, this was expected. I don't think there was ever a chance of our courts saying that Fraser made the right decision there. It was clear from the get-go, that, to me at least, that this was going to happen, that Zuma was going to be let out, and that did come to pass. And that was going to be challenged, and the court said exactly what I think we thought they would say. So what we have on our hands here is what I think is an important symbolic victory. Unfortunately, I don't think it's much of a practical victory. As you said, there's a whole appeals process coming. And the way I understand it is, until that process has been exhausted, Zuma will still remain outside of jail. And I'm sure the Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court, if he goes all the way, will confirm the judgment that he needs to go back to prison. But as is well known in political science, the courts cannot enforce their own rulings, and it will be thrown back to the executive at the end of the day. And unfortunately, I'm a cynic. I think that regardless of how good a reformer we might have in the presidency, or the appointees that he might make to the Correctional Services Department, they're not going to put one of their own, even one of their opponents, but nonetheless one of their own, in prison for 15 months. We've seen with other guys like Andile Lungsinga in PE, who actually assaulted someone quite brutally. He was in jail for about 2 minutes before he was let out. And I think we should expect this to carry on, regardless of who's in the presidency. But again, it's an important symbolic victory. It shows that the courts are not going to at least join the ANC as far as corruption is concerned. They might join them on some ideological issues, but it's an important symbolic victory that we must own and say good. AfriForum, the DA, and Suzman Foundation have done a great job here today for our democracy, and they should carry on fighting the fight, even though Zuma will never spend more than a few minutes for a photo op in jail. Carry on until 2024, so that we can actually get a government in that will actually put political crooks in jail. But I'm not sure we're there yet.
And that's the depressing thing. And I want to come to you, Ian, here before we go into the larger potential political fallout in this conversation. I want to bring you in on this particular issue because I framed it at the beginning by basically making the point, which unfortunately we South Africans are way too accustomed to at this stage. So there seems to be one set of rules which are incredibly lenient, almost favorable in their punishment of the political elites, and a completely different set of rules for South Africans. And we see this in practical ways, that those who are either politicians or political elites get treated with kid gloves by state institutions. For example, when Zuma was granted this medical parole, which was just unlawful, as the judge has rightly just pointed out, immediately we all harped back to the thoughts of one Shabir Sheikh, again a Zuma friend. It's amazing how they're all close proximity to Jacob Zuma, but Shabir Sheikh, who even to this day is seen gallivanting on golf courses around Durban.
Yeah, Sikli, I think there's a general issue in South Africa that there's a complete disregard for the law, for basic law and order. And if we look at the example that is set by certain political elite individuals, then it makes it quite obvious. To be very honest, I don't even think it's necessarily always a case of kid gloves. I think they're very often just simply in cahoots with each other. I honestly think that the state capture principle is far deeper rooted than we could even begin to understand. I honestly think, just in terms of the ANC, we must never forget that Cyril Ramaphosa himself, for many, many, many years, watched the way that Zuma was looting state coffers. And the fact that he did nothing, that he never spoke up, makes him complicit. It is absolutely that simple. I do not care what faction you belong to, and we cannot always blame everything in terms of the ANC on faction politics. They need to grow up. They need to stop being criminal. We need to get them out. It is that simple. So maybe I'm putting it bluntly, but it's a criminal organization. In fact, I always refer to them as a criminal gang that we know as the ANC, and unfortunately, I want someone to prove me wrong, and they can't. And the reasons you just mentioned is exactly why I say that. We do not see decent accountability. The fact that Zuma came out is an absolute disgrace. It made us even more of a laughing stock to the rest of the world. And I think the sad thing, Sikhli, the last bit I would like to say, is that we honestly have the potential with a great constitution to really be an upstanding country in terms of law and order, and setting an example to the rest of the world. The amount, just in terms of criminal justice, of fantastic experience that we have, especially in terms of multicultural law enforcement, is absolutely remarkable. You know, we've got people from across the board, from different cultures, in our law enforcement bodies. Some of them aren't there, unfortunately, anymore, but we really can set the example for the rest of the world. And unfortunately, because of this absolute thieving nature of the ruling party, that has fallen apart.
You know, I must come in here with two areas which I think both of you had touched on, but I think speak to the larger political analysis around the situation. We'll get to what we can do about it as South Africans, folks. Bear with me. You just joined us. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. We're at that halfway mark. And yes, that's how quick it is. The halfway mark is just come up on us here. This is only just a 30-minute show. I am watching your comments, guys. Get your questions in if you have any. But we're going to unpack this issue and the political potential fallout of this. I'm in conversation with Martin van Staden, of course, Legal Eagle. You'll find him at Sakilecha. He's based out in that part of the world now. Still part of the Free Market Foundation, but Sakilecha is his new home. And of course, Ian Cameron from Action Society SA. And of course, the chap who brought you the Firearm Guardian. If you want to know what that's all about, please make sure you watch Sunday's Liberty and Friends, the past Sunday, pardon me, Liberty and Friends, which is on my channel. Welcome to it. This is the BDL show. Fellas, you know, there's two things that you guys have really unpacked here, which needs a little bit of attention. Number one, it's the notion that Ian brings up of state capture, what he calls state capture, but really is a broader system, a deeper system, a purposeful system of cadre deployment. That is the ANC's policy of deploying cadres within key government institutions with the view of subverting them. That is, if you're deployed by the ANC in government, then you owe loyalty not to the Constitution, not to South African citizens, not to the rule of law, but to the ANC. And therefore, as a state official, you will act on behalf of ANC members, particularly those who are within your faction. That's what we're kind of seeing play, not kind of, that is exactly what we're seeing play out here, where a known associate of Jacob Zuma, who held previously the mantle of being the head of the Correctional Services department, he's the guy who basically took it upon himself to say, no, screw due process, screw the law, with the law prescribing that in order to release a prisoner on medical parole, a board of actual doctors and experts are meant to make that determination based on the facts, the medical facts of the particular inmate. No. He says, screws those individuals. I'll make the decision as the head honcho. And guess what? As a friend of Jacob Zuma, he was let go. Martin, the erosion of the rule of law, the erosion of due process by those who really see themselves as owing fealty to politics and not citizens.
Yeah, I mean, the ANC was clear about this from before the constitution was adopted, really, and a lot of your listeners will know about the idea of the National Democratic Revolution. Now, this is something that was made clear from the start, and that was that the vanguard of the revolution, the ANC and its alliance partners, will secure a political victory for the masses, and that was the constitution essentially. And then it will take some time. It will take over the levers of power. That includes the justice system, the courts, the private sector. And then in the future, which is probably about now, the ANC will bring about an economic revolution, the second stage of the revolution, where the constitution will be disregarded in the name of redistributing resources and equalizing society. And that's, of course, the nice official ideological version of what's going on. But a lot of the caterers, of course, use this to put paper over their eating at the trough and enriching themselves, of course. But the fact is, this seed of disregard for the law was always there. It was never really denied with any kind of force. You sometimes hear the president saying, "Yeah, we owe fealty to the law" and so on. But when they speak to constituents, when they speak at rallies, you hear the same story again about how the constitution is just actually a stepping stone at the end of the day. And we see this in the way that legislation is drafted. For example, just as you explained, the Correctional Services laws. The idea when that was drafted is that, of course, there will be a recommendation, and the minister, who is a rational, reasonable person, will make a determination based on the sound advice of the people around him. Now, the legislation says that he has this discretion, and of course, the discretion he used to disregard that advice, and he did that entirely with political convictions and political agendas in mind. And that just shows we have legislation written as if it's a rule of law respecting mature political society, which we don't yet have, unfortunately, in South Africa, which we could get when we go through that crucial turnover test for any democratic state, which is when the ruling party is removed and stays out of power for at least one term, so that there could be some interesting things happening in politics. I can't emphasize that enough. South Africa at a national level needs to see that before we can really come onto our own to have a justice system that takes high-ranking politicos to task and really puts them in jail. We're not going to see that until we have a different national government, whatever that might be.
Well, this brings me to that secondary point, therefore, which we must chew on if we are to discuss this issue, which is who governs? Who rules? Is it the rule of law, effectively, of due process, of a government elected by the people, which represents, our rights and defends our liberties? Or is it the rule of the mob, who, upon any whim, for any reason, for any individual, or any faction, or for whatever political whim, uses violence, the threat of violence, force, and coercion to get its way, especially if they are unhappy with what happens, in the formal justice system. What am I referring to here, fellas? Well, anybody who has a memory that isn't one of a goldfish will remember that in July, this country literally saw parts of it, namely KZN and Gauteng, and some areas go up in flames as looters on the one hand, and the so-called Zuma or Radical Economic Transformation faction, obviously who claimed responsibility for the ructions and the violence and the civil unrest, literally saw this country descend into what has now been proven to be the most costly riots in the history of this country and even in the world. So the question a lot of South Africans are asking now is, with this decision having been passed, which obviously harps back to when Zuma was jailed the first time, will we see a resurgence of those Zuma riots? Now, Ian, I must come to you here because, I'm not going to ask you to look into a crystal ball and opine insofar as to whether this will happen, but the fertile ground for it is here, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, Sikle. I think, look, honestly, and I might be wrong, again, it's not a matter of having a crystal ball, but I honestly don't think it's going to happen over Christmas. I think going to take it easy a bit. I think Zuma's still got a bit of a way to go. They need to rally a little bit. I think Cole Nias would like to say a few words, and whatever that may be. But I think it'll have a bit of a build-up if something were to happen. I honestly don't see it having the same scale as it did last time. And the reason I say that is because ordinary South Africans stood up and said, we won't allow this. And the big mistake the Zuma faction made with the unrest that we saw is they underestimated the grit that our people in this country have. Whether you live in the poorest of townships or the richest of suburbs, South African people don't stand back, and they're not to be messed with. So I honestly want to say I don't see it having the same momentum, but that we might have a few issues. Yes, I honestly think it can happen. I think it could also be that we'll have more of a splintered type of effort where we see parts of the N3 closing again. Those types of challenges may arise. I also think it might appear in different ways. You'll get groups like, for example, these trucking groups fighting with foreign nationals, that type of thing. That might be a bit of a smokescreen to get some kind of momentum going. I honestly also think that many people in South Africa are just utterly sick of the whole Zuma debate. So, I think people literally just want to tell him, listen, man, go to jail, do your thing. We're tired of you. We're tired of hearing your name. We want to see you behind bars. So just leave us alone. And I think the last thing, Sihle, is that, South Africans have been put under immense pressure because of the whole pandemic, whether right or wrong, lockdown or no lockdown. The point is just people are tired and they don't want to get into childish politics. And that's why they're so sick of the ANC. So I think all of those things add on. Nevertheless, I think something may happen. It's not going to happen immediately, and there's going to be some kind of build up to it, but not with the same momentum that they had earlier in 2021.
Well, let me come in here and come to you, Martin, because maybe this will be the final thought, because I want to add a bit of spice here. Insofar as me trying my best to avoid the crystal ball, but to look at the broader political analysis of why I argue the seeds, if you will, of violence. And I would agree with Ian that it wouldn't necessarily be as mass scale as we saw it, but rather targeted, and more specifically, this is what my view would be, it'll latch onto other issues. You rightly pointed out the N3 truckers debacle as being one avenue in which this happens. And I purposefully raised the specter of the RET faction, that is the Radical Economic Transformation faction, because they're not just in the ANC. They're found and dotted across the political landscape, specifically on the leftist-leaning political landscape. But the point I wanted to get to is this one, insofar as how I see this likely, okay, let me be fair, possibly playing out, because if I say likely, that's the crystal ball coming out. Two things, fellas, and I want to put it to you guys before we conclude. Number one, the Zuma riots or the July riots that we saw last time effectively fomented the existing anger of lockdown and impoverishment in order to, as things blew up, then slap on the label of Jacob Zuma is at the helm of this. I've made this point before insofar as, when people ask questions, why are people looting? Why are people looting? I said, well, it's a very angry, poor, and working poor in this country who, locked away from economic opportunity by the political elites, literally took to the streets to say, on the one hand, we're starving to death, and on the other hand, why is it that seemingly, as politicians make these rules, the elites and middle class are doing okay and we're not? I purposefully framed it that way because people were asking the question, oh, but if they're hungry, poor people, then surely they'll just loot food and that's it. Why are they taking flat screen TVs and appliances and all that? And I said, well, because poor people are just as aspirational like anybody else. And if you're sitting in a shack on a sand dune somewhere in the south coast of KZN and you're watching across the river or across the N3, if you're watching across the N2, these wonderful gated communities, people are enjoying all the amenities that the middle class do. Of course, when a riot like that happens, you will go for the very same amenities that seemingly create comfort under these uncomfortable circumstances. And people sort of understood that perspective from that angle. So therefore, in that instance, with that vein, pardon me, I would argue that ESCOM today and its announcement, and I'll make the link, folks, bear with me, I'll make the link. ESCOM and its announcement that we face the prospect of stage 8 load shedding, which is effectively more than 13 hours a day of no power, will not only plunge this country into darkness, but plunge us into a figurative darkness where an angry citizenry who are watching their quality of life deteriorate further. In other words, that same existing lockdown and its misery is still there, check. The poverty that it's created is still there, and the condescending notion by the state that 350 Rand will placate you, that anger, check, is still there. Now you have a situation where at a literal observable level, the power goes off for 13 hours a day, food in your freezer rotting, the inability to warm baby milk if you're a parent, whatever. In other words, all the things that we rely on for using electricity suddenly become eviscerated in front of us. That issue becomes the cherry on top, which foments the next wave of violence, which again, that Zuma faction will slap on their label on top and say, ha, you see, these people are angry because of what is being done to Jacob Zuma, assuming that day if he is put back into prison. So it's the perfect storm, perhaps, which again is rearing itself here with multiple things happening at once. And equally, as I said last time, multiple things can be true when the violence then breaks out. So in that instance, that's my view on this particular instance. But let me come back to you, Ian, then I'll come to Martin. Because for me, the question therefore to anybody who's listening to me now, listening to that analysis is, holy heck, what do we then do? How do we safeguard ourselves? Because if we remember back to July, the SAPS and the South African National Defence Force and those who are at the helm politically of law enforcement were nowhere to be seen. So what do we do now? How do we protect ourselves, Ian?
They were there, Sikhle. They were just watching. No, so I think there are a few simple steps that communities can do. I think you're 100% right. I think circumstances in South Africa can create a perfect storm for momentum to grow. And I think it might be better if one looks at it the way that you've described it compared to what I may have said earlier. I think it might create some more context. So I think it's an incredibly useful point of view that you've raised. Nevertheless, what can communities do? I think firstly, they need to make sure that they've got decent communication structures that are not solely dependent on Eskom. Or, for example, a cell phone tower. So if at all possible, they need to invest in some kind of a communication system. I think the next thing is to have a pretty rigid structure, rigid yet flexible structure when it comes to community leadership, community safety. They need to know what's going on in the community through those communication systems that they have in place, reporting incidents, following up with the police, other law enforcement agencies, etc. And I think general community visibility will deter any kind of violence. And it usually does, I must be honest. In the most cases you would have seen in July and previously in other places. Remember, everything that happened in July had happened before. It just never happened nationally at such a large scale. So I think there are many things that people can do. But to summarize, communication structure, community visibility, and if possible, do training. You need to know what you can and can't do. And South African legislation leaves more than enough room for communities to be able to defend themselves, their families, and their properties.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Absolutely. And again, I can't underpin this enough. Martin, I'll give you the final word on this particular issue because, there's obviously a lot of people now who might be listening to me say this, might be listening to Ian rightly point out the what to do in this particular instance, but might be also a bit fearful because they looked at, for example, what happened in Phoenix. Now, again, quick bookmark here. No one is condoning the alleged murderers who went after people. So that's not who we're talking about here, and that's not what we're talking about at all. What we're talking about rather is those various communities across the country, including those in Phoenix, of those who are lawful firearm owners, for instance, got together with their local structures, whether it was a community policing forum or a neighborhood watch or whatever, and manned their neighborhoods to prevent the looting. But now, with that in the back of their mind, given what has happened in Phoenix, how the politicians responded by targeting them in a racial way and basically suggesting that those few cases of murder, wrong as they may be, represented all of those individuals, even outside of Phoenix, who were quote unquote vigilantes, they might be wondering, holy hell, does the law actually provide us these protections for us to take things into our own hands if the state fails?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, when the state fails, your reliance on law should take a little bit of a backseat. I say this as someone who is doing his doctorate in law. I have nothing but respect for the law. I work in law on a day-to-day basis. But I think you have Ian centered there. Sorry. Don't worry about what the law says, essentially. So there's certain rules of, call it common law or natural law, which you should always bear in mind. And that the obvious thing there is, if you need to protect yourself, don't do what some opportunists did and murder people rather than not defend themselves in their communities. Don't do that. But when your hands are tied, when a mob is coming down upon you, you should, and I think any reasonable court will, after the fact, find that you acted reasonably if you defend yourself to the utmost means available to you. So don't be too afraid of that. I think our courts have been pretty good when, from the circumstances, it's quite clear that you didn't have any other choice but to take deadly force into your own hands to defend yourself. Don't worry too much about that. You will be charged with a crime, but that's just the procedure. It doesn't mean you're going to go to prison. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Rather worry about protecting your family, yourself, and your property in the moment, in the situation. Don't sit around worrying about political consequences. And I mean, this is important. I think that God help those rioters who target the same communities that were targeted in July of this year, because those communities, I am certain, have learned a very valuable lesson. The people of Vryheid, the people of Phoenix, I believe in Newcastle as well. These people have learned an important lesson. They've gotten to know their neighbors very well now. They have established communication channels, I believe, with their neighbors. And if this should happen again, those communities will be very, very ready. Now, I can't say that for the rest of South Africa, but maybe, every cloud has a silver lining. And that is the silver lining we got from the July riots. Communities are organizing to protect themselves. If we have some more riots, that will bring more communities to that level. Of course, I don't want there to be riots so we can train people, but it's one of the inevitable consequences of the situation we find ourselves in. And I think it will be better long-term for South Africa if more people come to terms with the reality of the situation that we face. And that will increasingly be, rely on your communities. Don't worry too much about what parliamentarians in Cape Town put on paper. Always, of course, respect the rights of your fellow man. But when it comes to the lives of your family, the security of your property, the livelihoods of your entire community, then it becomes relatively clear in the situation what you must do. And this is, of course, something that all South Africans across race and gender and whatever understand very intuitively. We had taxi operators defending malls in Soweto, for instance. We had communities all around the show getting together. So the formal South Africa that we see with the speeches from the politicians, that's really a secondary consideration. The facts on the ground are moving a bit too quickly for the ANC to control at this stage. There's going to be a lot more community reliance between now and the next election, and maybe then in 2024, if we replace the national government with a different one, then we can move back a bit from this and get back to having a real civil society that is premised on positive law, that respects the law as it stands, where you don't have to worry too much about this. But we are not in that situation now. We are very much in a situation where formal law does have to take a little bit of a backseat to the reality that the people are facing on the ground.
Absolutely. And guys, I must end the conversation here. Except before I do that, I'm going to give you both final say just to let people know how they can get into contact with you and the various organizations that you work with. Ian, how do the folks get in touch?
Go to actionsociety.co.za. You can check us out there. You can get in touch, send an email to communitysafety@actionsociety.co.za. If there's anything we can advise with in terms of preparing your community for something like this, we would gladly do so. And I must use the opportunity, Sikle, to say join Firearms Guardian. Go check it out. You've seen the link in the chat. And I think it's very useful for law-abiding citizens to make sure they have protection if they were to defend themselves within the framework of the law.
Absolutely. And I just had to put those on the screen. Shout out to Lars Solis for doing the extra work there of getting all of those contact details on the screen. That is Ian Cameron, of course, from Action Society SA and Firearms Guardian. Martin, how do the folks get in touch with you, homie?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for another great show, Sikle. Viewers can find me at my website, that is martinvanstaden.com. All of my social media platforms, all of my articles, all of my appearances like this one are readily available there. Please also go to the website of Sakeliga, sakeliga.co.za. And please consider joining as a member there as well. Our entire point of existence is to create an independent, self-sufficient business community, and everyone is part of that community, and that really slots in with what we've discussed here today. We want to make sure that small business owners know each other in the community, know what to do when situations like these arise, and that they're able to do that from a well-positioned place. So please consider joining up. And also, please support the Free Market Foundation. That's freemarketfoundation.com. And yeah, please stay positive. It doesn't matter all the nonsense that's going on. Their liberty is always within reach. Forget about defeatism. Forget about undue cynicism. Let's get together. Let's build a solution to our problems. Only when we make that mental change, when we decide to solve the problem, can it actually happen. Thanks, Claire.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's Martin from Staden, of course, who you can find at martinvanstaden.com. And Ian Cameron, of course, at Firearms Guardian and, of course, Action Society SA. Thank you, by the way, dear viewer, for watching this show, another episode of the BDL show. Make sure you hit that like button, please, on the way out. It really is important. It helps this channel, guys, to get out, especially given the fact that it is being shadow banned. Trust you me, there are people who click on my show and are given a warning ahead of time by Facebook in particular. Warning, the scary right-winger. So make sure you hit that like button. It helps the show get out and make it to a much bigger audience, and actually share the link after the show. With that being said, thank you for watching the show. If you want to support your favorite fat boy, Big Daddy Liberty, all of them details are in the descriptor of the video. Guys, have a great evening, and remember, as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.